In June, July of 2009, there was actually an internal organic freedom movement in Iran. And the people were agitating for genuine freedom and reform. And the United States government decided to ignore or to marginalize that push for freedom in pursuit of what we eventually saw several months ago, and that's the Iranian nuclear deal. And this man here is probably one of the nastiest challenges we're going to have to deal with for some time to come, if he stays alive. And this is General Qasem Soleimani. And he runs the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. He was the one who basically persuaded Vladimir Putin to send his forces into Syria in the summer and early fall of 2015. This man is probably responsible for several hundred, if not about 1,000 American deaths in Iraq in the last 10 years. He was supposed to be sanctioned by the United States and the United Nations as a terrorist. And when he was violating the sanctions openly for most of 2015, there was no punishment, there was no retribution. The Iranians got the message. They can act with impunity whenever they want, and there's no price to pay because everybody now wants a piece of that $100 billion market that's been unfrozen with the assets that are flowing into Iran now as a result of the nuclear deal. So they're going to use that money to support terrorism, to destabilize governments in the Middle East, and to pursue nuclear weapons that they want to put on ballistic missiles. So this gives you a sense of their current range, and you see they're able to hit Turkey and Eastern Europe. But here are missiles that the Iranians are working on that allow them to strike deep into the heart of Europe, which I don't think they have any intention of doing, but they can threaten. And now they have leverage that they didn't have 6 months ago or a year ago. And I'm very concerned about what the future will hold because of this nuclear deal that was struck. Personally, I don't trust the Iranians as far as I can throw a stone, and I'm afraid that the West is being had in pursuit of European contracts in Iran that I think are going to hurt us in the long run. And in Libya, we now have Islamic State establishing a base here in a city called Sirte, which ironically was the birthplace of Muammar Gaddafi, who I think very unwisely the United States and Europe decided to overthrow. And we now have complete chaos in this country. Islamic State has about 5,000 of its militants there, and they're able to tap into Libya's vast oil reserves for additional oil revenue. So you have now essentially $1 billion economy run by Islamic State with a whole host of illegal activities, kidnapping, ransoms, and of course oil revenue out of northern Iraq, eastern Syria, and now Libya. And you also get a sense here of the kinds of migration routes that we all saw in the news last year affecting Europe. And you're going to see, I think, increased flows coming out of sub-Saharan Africa through these uncharted, unmonitored territories of Libya straight up into Malta and Italy. And see a reprise, maybe many times larger, in European streets and cities, not just next year, but probably for the next 2 to 3 years. Intelligence agents will tell us that there's maybe 3 to 4 million people in Northern Africa and Southwest Asia that are looking to enter Europe in this very short time frame. And this is going to have a serious effect on the long-term prospects for European prosperity. And part of this is Europe's own fault. Europeans aren't marrying anymore, and they're not having children anymore. Now, those of you who follow demography may know that a society needs about an average of 2.1 children per family in order to sustain population. So those countries that have more than 2.1 children average per family are growing populations, and those that have less are shrinking populations. So this gives you a sense of what's happening with the aging of Europe. It's getting older and older, and you have a welfare system in most of Europe, cradle to grave, that is becoming seriously unsustainable because you have a shrinking labor force and stagnant economies having to pay for greater pensions, retirement benefits, and health benefits for people who are dying not at 65 or 75, but 85 and 95. This gives you a sense of the demographic decline of Europe, folks. those red areas are areas in Europe that are in absolute population decline. And this is becoming an increasingly larger part of Europe, and there seems to be no solution in sight, unfortunately. And all of you who have followed the Eurozone crises of the last half decade know very well what is happening with sovereign debt issues in Europe, what is happening with public debt, what is happening with banking crises in countries such as Spain and the like. These are not over by any stretch of the imagination. And I had the opportunity to be on CNN, I think about 7 or 8 times this past summer, talking about the Greece Eurozone negotiations. That's not over yet either. So things are a little bit quieter right now, but the democratic political systems of Europe cannot handle the kinds of reforms that are going to be needed to be undertaken in these countries to reduce pensions, to provide for greater privatization, to provide for labor reforms that are needed to ever wake Europe out of its stagnant economies.